We're gathering today at the forks of Dashkanzivi, or Antler River, on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and Chinookan peoples. In the London area, we're governed by various treaties. There was the Treaty 6 London Township, the Treaty 7 Sombre Township, and Treaty 21 Longwoods. The land continues to be home to diverse Indigenous peoples, whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and water, and as vital contributors to our community and to the Words Festival. The Forks is a traditional gathering place where tributaries converge, as you can see out the gorgeous window of the center of the Forks. It's a place to gather and reflect, to listen to the land and the water, and to build our resilience as we confront, as our topic is today, our monsters and demons. The stories we tell to capture our sense of place carry ghosts, or those histories and past experiences, both visible and invisible, forgotten and remembered, of previous ways of living. Our stories of place, in this sense, are ghost stories, or stories of our ghosts that remain charged in the present times. When we confront our ghosts, our monsters, our demons, our familiar sense of place, of home, can often become unfamiliar and unhomely. In his famous essay on the uncanny, the psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud described the uncanny as a species of the terrifying in which the familiar suddenly becomes unfamiliar. Not because it introduces something that's altogether new or novel, but because it points back to something known of old in a non-intellectual way, something lost and then found, like a return of the repressed. Our stories of place then are often uncanny ghosts, filled with lost and found monsters and demons. It's my privilege to have the opportunity to host this afternoon's event with three London authors, Jason Dickson, Jenna Rose Sands, and Tom Cull, to explore how their work is haunted by stories and histories of place. I will say, too, that our feature artists have been holding their own conversation about this event over the past month in preparation. So as the moderator today, part of my job is to share space with these amazing folks, but it's also to get out of the way and let them share that conversation and do justice to that conversation that they've had with each other. I'd like to recognize the generous support of the Ontario Arts Council, the London Arts Council, and the Faculty of Arts and Humanities, support that allowed us to keep this festival free during the pandemic, which is something that we aspire to for the universal access to the arts during these really difficult times, and we really do thank those supports. And of course, my warm thanks to Museum London and the staff. We couldn't deliver the Words Festival without the museum, so thanks to the museum staff, and many of them around here. Okay, so I'd like to offer brief introductions for each of our guests before we dive in. Jason Dickson, down at the end, is the author of Clearance, Selected Journals of Dr. Michael Purdon, parapsychologist, The Hunt, Glen Piano by Gladys Prittis, London 150 Cultural Moments with Vanessa Brown, Tom Bidner, Raw, written with Tom Baines. He recently released his new chapbook, The Demon Book, with Baseline Poetry Press, and I had a copy to hold up, but Jason's got it now, so maybe Jason will hold it up to show everybody. And I understand, and I spoke to Karen Schindler, that there is a new run, so some of you might know, there we go, there's a new run so you can buy what was previously sold out of the chapbook, so that's something to note. He lives here in London with his partner, Vanessa Brown, and together they co-own Brown and Dickson Bookstore, as I'm sure everybody here knows because they visit frequently. Jenna Rose Sands, coming to the other end of our dais here, is a Cree Anishinaabe artist and writer who is the creator of Atrocities Against Indigenous Canadians for Dummies, a zine series. Oh, I've got a couple of them here. This is kind of what the zines look like. Also sold at Brown and Dickson, I should note. It's a zine series that translate what she describes as her emotional exhaustion over the current state of Indigenous affairs into informative zines that educate and question widespread prejudice regarding Indigenous people. Focusing on each zine on the experiences and stories of Indigenous people who have endured a multitude of atrocities committed by the Canadian government, Jenna Rose is able to pair words with dynamic mixed media for a result that is both powerful and visually engaging. As an ongoing series, Jenna Rose is trying to challenge language and ideas around Indigenous issues, one zine at a time, and I'm hoping that we'll hear a little bit more about that series today too. In the middle, Tom Cull grew up in Huron County, Treaty 29 territory, and now resides in London, Ontario. He teaches creative writing at Western, and as everybody will know, was our beloved Poet Laureate from 2016 to 2018. His chapbook, What the Badger Said, was published in 2013. His first collection of poetry, Bad Animals, was published in 2018. And he has a new book of poetry in the works, and we may, if we're lucky, get to hear a little bit of that. Depends on, I guess, if we're good. Since 2012, Tom has been the director of Antler River Rally, a grassroots environmental group he co-founded with his partner, Miriam Love, who's here. I saw Miriam earlier. And their son, Emmett. So that's our group. Join me in welcoming our three London artists today.
Welcome, Tom.
So I thought I'd start us off with a question. I mentioned at the beginning that these three artists have had a conversation going since we conceived of doing this event. They've been having conversations amongst themselves. And one of the issues that has been at the center of these conversations is the question of monsters and how monsters relate to their work. In fact, Tom has been sending me email reports of some of these conversations, and the subject lines have been great in my inbox, like monsters or monster mash. So it's been a fun inbox to get these email subject lines. I thought we could start there by talking about monsters. How do you understand, and this is a question for all three of our artists, how do you understand the idea of monster, and how do monsters appear in your work, or perhaps in your lives? So who would like to start us off?
Ding, ding, ding. Okay, before we, I think just quickly to say that this entire panel is just basically about us hanging out, the three of us, and complaining, I guess. And then we're like, okay, let's see if people want to hear us. So thank you for coming. When we were talking about monsters and demons, I think one thing that I brought up was, in order to understand monsters and demons present and in our lives, it was important to understand like how people historically have seen them. Like we have always seen monsters as like Frankenstein's monsters, the boogeyman, Swamp Thing, and in a more real sense, we've always had this idea of like stranger danger, that you know, the monsters in our community are people that we don't know. You know, that person over there, or these people on the streets, or people that are, you know, living rough or anything like that. That was sort of what I grew up with. You know, it was like, you know, if someone you don't know comes up to you, you run, you scream, you say no. And so in order for us to like sort of continue this idea of like what is monsters now in our lives and in our work, I think we had to think about what we had historically seen monsters as. And for me, a lot of that, the idea of monsters and demons and ghosts from the past are informed by movies and the media, and like, you know, your house feels funky, it's probably because you got a spirit, and maybe you should go smudge it out. When it's like, oh, wait a second, that bad vibe is actually just your past, and maybe you should deal with it. But that's how I sort of perceived it. It's definitely evolved now that I'm older. I don't think I'm gonna go in the Thames and find like Swamp Thing. I mean, I may grow like another limb because of how like polluted it is at times, but I don't think that something's gonna come out and drag me down. You spend a lot of time in the Thames, so maybe it's different.
Yeah, well, you want to go on this? Or
No, the Thames monster, I think, is something you need to speak to.
Yeah. Okay, well, yeah, there are going to be a lot of monsters. So first of all, thanks to everyone for coming, and my fellow panelists and Josh for organizing this. This has really been nice to have a couple of friends to sit down and kind of think through an issue, think through this topic of monsters. And you know, I kind of come to it from academe. My dissertation was about 19th and 20th century, the history of 19th and 20th century freak shows in the American context. So that's bound up in the idea of monstrosity and what a monstrosity is. And So to come at it from, for a second, from an academic perspective, monsters from the Latin monstra, right, which means to warn or to tell or to show, right? So we find that in the word demonstrate. So monsters show us something, they tell us something, they warn us of something. We invent them to kind of tell us stories about, ourselves. And so I kind of think of monsters as, they're produced by othering. As soon as we put up a boundary or a wall, we make a monster. We don't put up walls because there are monsters. We build walls and we create monsters. And I think that's what, from a, environmental, I think about, I'm a nature poet. I think about, the binaries that we create between humans and nature, right? The first false dichotomy that, that their nature is out there and the human is not nature, where our bodies are a biosphere, right? Like our bodies are comprised of bacteria and fungus and protists, and there are these mites that live in our skin, and yeah,
so hot.
and and at night they come out of our skin and they mate on our foreheads and our noses and on our nipples. So think about that when you're going to bed tonight.
Maybe on your nipples.
I read this, So your body is a wonderland, and
I'm thinking your body is a biosphere. Like, what a beautiful love song that is.
Yeah. So
mites mating on your nipples.
So yeah. So we have this idea that the human is this discrete individual, and that we are part of the environment, right? And we've gotten ourselves into such ecological disastrous territory by creating this otherness that turns nature both into kind of either kind of a sublime encounter with God or a monstrous encounter, another false dichotomy. So I think of monsters as kind of dichotomy-making machines.
Yeah. So I think certainly my sense of monsters, I think that chimes and harmonizes with your sense, and your sense is monster as sort of a creation of something that we haven't dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
So I think of authors like M.R. James. He's a classic ghost story author. He was an antiquarian and a Catholic, and in his stories, there's always some fumbling scholar in his, cozy little library who, unearths some ancient pagan whistle or something like that, or reads aloud some text from the days of yore that births a vengeful spirit that upends the, foundations of Western civilization. And certainly, deep in his stories, there's this extraordinary fear of the ancient past and the other. And he's like a very British ghost story writer. And I think unconsciously, perhaps expressing that fear. But his stories are fascinating because they do articulate that fear very, very well. For better or for worse. But in his stories, there's this, sort of these barbarians at the gates of the ordered world, ready to, storm the library if you read this passage the wrong way. And I think it's not hard to read that as just all the shit that he and his world hasn't dealt with and has tried to push to the side.
Yeah, I think a key thing through it is that, they're all kind of imaginary. Like they're, these imaginary monsters. And I think sort of the crux of what we've been talking, at least the three of us in our own time, what a privilege to be able to just make up imaginary monsters. There's some real historical, true-ass monsters that exist. And I think instead of confronting these things that, you and both of you are referring to, it's just easier to just make up the wildest characters that are this one will suck the blood of virgins, but only on the third full moon of the year while farting on a crystal smudging sage. That seems more believable for people to get scared about than, your weird Uncle Randy is a fucking monster. And we don't want to deal with that because that's uncomfortable. So we'll just make up this like weird animal creature to make you scared of like walking near that person's house or something. Like this is like just the way that people create wild ideas in order to avoid actually navigating truth in their own stories, you know? So, and I think like we sort of just came to that, you know, and I think even the title, like we had a lot of drafts on the title of this talk. But it came afterwards, after we're like, what the hell are we gonna talk about? Like, what are we annoyed by? Like,
But to jump back to Josh's question, exactly this is that, you know, I think we've all kind of defined our idea of monsters, but your second part was like, where do we see them in our daily lives? So you were just talking, Jenna Rose, about that. Do you want to jump in on that and we can kind of go from there?
Why, thank you, friend.
This is how we talk, actually.
This is exactly how we talk 5 years in. Thank you. Would you like to go back to that? I think the biggest monster that I've seen, and I think we just said, and well, I guess let's scale back a bit on, let's talk about London. We're sitting here at the Forks, it's beautiful, we're all feeling so like sweet and harmonious, and the world's on fucking fire. After yesterday, I spent most of my day in tears and in rage. And we sit here, and Canadians in London has a real good heart, you know, steeped in this, a feeling of feeling smug. We look at our neighbors and we are smug, like, oh, that can't happen here. How horrible, how terrible. The monster here in London, and that has been for ages, is inaction and smugness. One zine series I would love to do, we were talking about a podcast, is about London's motto, let's not and say we did. You know, like that's such a London motto. Let's not and say we did. We have a dire opioid crisis. We have massive homelessness crisis. We have some shitty police brutality. We have a lack of funding. The amount of the housing wait list, if you are like being assaulted and you're homeless, it's like 10 years. If you're experiencing domestic violence, we'll fast track that. Now you gotta wait 8 years. Our mayor is Pokeroo. Where is he? Like, now he's just like, okay, I got my pension, I'm tapped out. I'll let someone else do the job now. And it's in action. But we like to think that we're smug. We like to think that we're doing these things. So London's motto really is, let's not say we did.
Meanwhile, we tell monster stories. You've heard them all. When people talk about downtown, we've heard people say, it's like you're walking through a movie. It's like zombies, you know, and we're using that language to describe people, right? To describe our neighbors. And so it's the inaction is the monster that masks itself through turning, you know, people, neighbors, into monsters. And that's something I very much see in London. Also see down at the river every time we're doing river cleanups. It's the same system that treats people like trash and throws them away, that then also treats the environment in a way that you exploit its resources, turn it into commodities to serve an unending consumerist, hyper individual that then throws those things away down at the river, right? Full circle. So those are some of the kind of monstrosities that I see unfolding in London all the time.
There's not like some like garbage monster like floating through the Thames being like, like, you know, garbage carts and tires and like, you know, chip wrappers and stuff. Like it's not.
The monster actually in some ways and a lot of times in doing river cleanup, two things people talk about. Unhoused people or, you know, people camping rough and the garbage that is produced by that. And it's like, yep, it's true that homelessness, that system creates, but we also live in homes where our garbage has just magically disappeared once a week, right? So that's a bit of that. And then the other thing is the litterer. Everyone says, I can't believe that people just throw stuff out of their, you know, and it's like, there are people that litter. It's a fraction of the problem. It's consumption, right? It's our consumption. And it's our garbage. And a lot of the garbage we pick up is you've recycled. You've dutifully recycled the night before and it got knocked over. Think about how many thousands of garbage bins go out every night. How many get knocked over the wind? Where do you think it all ends up, right? So that's another kind of boogeyman of like environmentalism, is this kind of litterer or polluter. And they're out there for sure, but it really deflects our attention away from our own, the way we consume monstrously.
And maybe I could jump in to direct something to Jason. I'm really curious too, in terms of how you translate these monsters, whether it's past or present, and feel free to address to the present as well. But when I was reading your work in preparation, I was really struck by your investment in the ghost story, in ghost story as a genre, but also you're really playful with it. You mix poetry and prose, text and image, historical record and fiction. As I was reading Glen Piano by Gladys Prittis as an example, it took me a while to get my head around the narrative eye of the story, which I had originally thought to ascribe to you, Jason Dickson, because of your interest in local history, but there's something far more complicated at work with that narrative eye. But I wanted to ask you, in terms of this question of how do you take these monsters and put them into your work, what is it about the ghost story that attracts you so much as a writer?
I like that question. The ghost story is a very, very useful set of tools, I think. And to sort of continue from what we were talking about earlier, I think the ghost story has, and in the case of M.R. James, it's been used to do something fascinating but terrible, And my interest as a writer of ghost stories is to look at the ways that my characters, or people more broadly, use storytelling as a way to ignore the terrible things that they're doing. So, again, I think this chimes with what we're talking about really closely. So in a ghost story, you have, murder and past guilt and, blood and guts and all those wonderful things that you can play around with. But you can also, now, writing ghost stories, really start to examine how those stories are built and how you can take them apart, and how you can take a character and bring them into the story with all their presumptions of safety, and then slowly kind of pull the rug out from under them, not just in their lives as lived in the story, but in the way that they build their sense of self and their sense of safety through storytelling as a genre, the ghost story as a genre. So I like that. I like it as sort of an exploration of someone kind of really becoming aware of the terrible things that they do, or as an exploration of the way that they don't become aware of the terrible things that they do, and they use stories as a way to protect themselves from that.
Absolutely. And maybe I'm going to jump over to Jenna Rose next to ask this question about, and then I'll come back to Tom, the question of how your work integrates some of these monsters that you're describing in your life. And I'm thinking of the title, Atrocities Against Indigenous Canadians for Dummies. When I first heard that title, the juxtaposition of atrocities and then for dummies, like it does shock you. The title shocks you immediately. And as I'm moving through your zines, one of the things that I find so fascinating is the collage of image, art, and text. But there's also a collage of historical quotation, historical facts, data from government and non-governmental sources. For example, I was reading maybe last month the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, this book here, A Knock on the Door, which is a condensed version of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And in the chapter on the story of the school experience, I noticed that Jenna Rose had pulled out so many of these stories, the first person testimonies from the survivors for the first zine of the section, and then juxtaposed them with personal reflection and historical facts. And I thought it was really compelling because it totally and quotations from historical figures like John A. Macdonald and Duncan Campbell Scott, people who were responsible for the construction of these systematic racist institutions. And it refigures them in the way that the zine works. But the question I have is, how do you translate those monsters in when you're selecting these materials? How do you go about putting that together?
Well, I mean, I don't really have to do much. They're monsters. They're really terrible people. They've kind of written their own character arc. So they've done a lot of like really great work for me, you know, when it comes to creating something that's really horrifying. So I guess credit to them for being awful. And I think like one thing that was important was that even if people did know about what has occurred and what is still occurring, there's a big complacency to it. And, you know, how I kind of felt about it was, you know, and just like care warning, like subtle discussion of, you know, sexual assault, you know, when people are trying to get people to understand, like specifically male identified folks, that like, you know, sexual assault is bad. And they're like, what if it was your mom or your daughter or your sister? And it's like, that's fucked. It has to be something that's close to you in order for you to feel that it is wrong. And that's kind of how I felt about it. It's like, I have to make this so potent and so horrifying that you can imagine this being your children or your grandchildren for you to care enough to not even just do anything about it, but actually to learn about it. Like the things that I'm writing in these zines, they're not new. I'm not reinventing the wheel. I'm just parsing it down because people are inherently lazy and they don't want to learn about things if it's uncomfortable. We don't like being uncomfortable. It feels uncomfortable. So maybe I'll just put it off to the side because then I'll feel a little more comfortable. And I'll only feel a little uncomfortable when people ask me about it. And then I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. So I wanted to make it so it was quick, it was easy, it was a punch, and it was visually dynamic enough that you were like, wow, this is fucked, I'm gonna keep looking at it. So there was a lot of like hard words paired with imageries of children, and a lot of the things that I took imagery from was really like weird racist craft books from like the 60s and 70s, where it's like, what to do on a rainy day? Let's pretend you're an Indian. And like, so the back of the second one is like a kid that's like going like this in a little paper, whatever. And so pairing those together, because I wanted there to be a level of discomfort. Like I wanted that, like feel uncomfortable, lean into it. It's the only way that we're going to grow. But by ways of monsters, like demons, I didn't have to do much work. I just had to be like, look, this is this person, and they are inherently terrible. And a lot of the systems that we now have around us are based off of that. Academia is still incredibly colonial. You know, as much as they want to, like, we're going to decolonize and land back, and we're going to hire more brown people, and blah, blah, blah. It all functions in the way that is not acknowledging how the various Black, Indigenous people of color have always lived. We don't meet at a boardroom. Like when I have to talk with friends, I don't meet at a board table. Like, did we meet at a board table? No, we met outside and we hashed out this idea, but everything is done in this way. And so people aren't seeing that we still do everything the way that it's always been done. And how do you change it if you just keep doing the same thing? There are people out there so close to us that like they think these like founding fathers are like, you know, the bee's knees. I don't know. They think it's great, and it's like, oh, gross, man. You know, we name our children after problematic people. Like, you know, stop doing that. Don't do that.
The monstrous is in action. I want to come back to that too, because I think it's very powerful. I want to bring Tom into this conversation too, in terms of how you're translating monsters and monstrosity into your poetry. And you've begun to discuss that in your opening remarks. There's something of an eco-poetics of invasive species in your work, which is really fascinating, which seems to call for a challenge to conventional modes of what we might call nature writing, or that pristine notion of nature. In conversation with David Hubert, you've described your style, or a collective style of writing of other poets that you work with, as dirty nature writing, which is quite a nice term.
Super dirty.
I couldn't help but ask
Naked nature writing.
about dirty nature writing. It has all sorts of nice overtones here. How do you translate monsters into poetry, and would this translation be an example of dirty nature writing?
Yeah, I mean, dirty nature. Yeah, well, that was kind of like, actually Miriam came up with that title because we had this group of poets that we would meet with and share our poems and workshop, and you call us like the Dirty Nature Boys or something like that. And so we came up with this notion of dirty nature, and what it's trying to do is it's playful, but it's trying to disturb that kind of that binary that I talked about at the beginning of pristine nature, right? Pristine nature and that whole idea of nature as a terra nullius, as free and open space, is a colonial construct, right? It was very much used as part of the atrocities of colonialism, the logic of like, I can just go out into this. And Duncan Campbell Scott, an architect of the residential schools, is a poet, and so we have to, I teach nature writing, and I try to kind of talk to students about and challenge what is a kind of pervasive idea of nature in this pristine way that is untouched and it's wonderful. You go out there and it's like it's kind of like a spiritual, spa day. The land that we walk onto is, has histories, and it has history. That precedes us, right? And so, so kind of that's one of the complications that we're trying to bring out by that notion of dirty nature. And then again, talking again about the body, right, and how we set ourselves above or separate from nature, which is in so many ways the reason why we're in this mess. And it is this kind of separation that allows us to do all these atrocious and monstrous things. So my poems are always trying to kind of negotiate that and show that like we're nature in this room right now. There are rich, natural entanglements going on right in this room.
Dirty nature happening right now.
Things are dirty in this room, yeah. And so, we look out that window and we think of, urban spaces as not nature. And of course, right down there right now, I'm looking at geese, but I know that there are mink and beavers and there's 90 species of fish in that river, and they're all fighting to survive and do their thing. And so we live in this kind of entangled, rich kind of world of relationships, and this is the thing, is that we hive off those relationships. And so I think so I guess my poems try to kind of look at that in some way, and my pedagogy, my teaching.
Absolutely, and I was really grateful that Tom gave me an advanced preview of a manuscript that he's working on, and he knows he's already reaching for it because he's always reaching for water. So he's reaching for the poems because he knows I'm going to ask him to read one. He's going to drink so he can read. There's a poem in your manuscript that and some other people might have heard, but this might be the first time that some people will hear it. And the poem's called Treaty 45 and a half. And I was wondering, this is an example potentially of one of these poems. And would you be willing to read Treaty 45 and a half for us?
Yeah. It's not about, it is about, I guess, invasive species in some ways, if we think about ourselves in that way. There's a lot of poems in the collection that
I hear treaties and I think of invasive species.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but like this sounds like it's going to be right up the alley of like invasive species.
Yeah, it is. So Treaty 45 is on the border of Treaty 29, which is the Huron track, and then Treaty 45 and a half goes from at like Point Clark up to kind of the Bruce Peninsula. This is a treaty that's negotiated in the middle of the 19th century, when there's a lot of European settlers coming in and just moving into Saugeen Ojibwe territory and taking over the land. And so the Lieutenant Governor of Canada or whatever uses this as an opportunity to try to negotiate a treaty for this land, and says basically, we're powerless to protect you from the violence of settlers. We can't do it. We don't, so if you sign this treaty, we can make sure that then the whole Bruce Peninsula will be your territory and you will be protected. And so this is a treaty that is signed through coercion, and there's a whole history. I recommend you reading David D. Plain. He's a historian, scholar from Aamjiwnaang, and I've sat down and talked with David a number of times. He's got a brief history of the Saugeen Peninsula. It's a great book that will kind of give you more in depth about how this treaty was signed. Of course, the minute it was signed, then the government started going after all of the Bruce Peninsula, right? So it was a complete lie, it was a manipulation, and that is still before the courts today. So I mean,
Color me shocked.
yeah, exactly, yeah. So this is, of course, a history I didn't grow up learning. I grew up in this area. I went to a public school called East Wallinash Public School, named after a Ojibwe chief. We didn't learn anything about that, but, you know, and so I have been thinking about this relationship I have with home. I had a beautiful upbringing on a beautiful piece of land, and I have nostalgia for that, but now that nostalgia, of course, sits beside what I understand, which is the privilege of that nostalgia to paper over the monstrosity of colonialism, right? And so I'm trying to kind of, in my own work, grapple with holding two things in my hand at the same time, which we've talked about as well.
Duality.
Duality, yeah. So this is a poem that I wrote at Point Clark, which looks out across to Michigan. It's called Treaty 45 and a half. Contend with 10,000 years, the lake once so low, a land bridge stretched from here to Alpena. Boulders drowned by rising waters mark places paleo hunters corralled caribou, crossed from north, stepped on this beach, throwing forward loops of time and relation. Now the beach is waterlogged, nearly gone. A red balloon snarls in tree roots lapped by the surf. Waves paint dull stones, churn froth, broken shells, cigarette butts. I find a green plastic figure, headdress, bare-chested, moccasins, expressionless, made in China. And another handful of sand and empty gun cap cartridge, the kind we bought as kids, flashing badge, quick draw, we laid down the lot and reloaded. Killed each other before lunch in a clap of sulfur and smoke. These are my rural ruins. Crop tours, mineral moonlight, smelt runs, beach sturgeon, July bonfires burned, our school notes, other histories and geographies, ours, the bored drone of Upper and Lower Canada. Wolfe and Montcalm lulled us into daily disremembering, sitting high in a tractor cab, blasting country, hydraulics and steel, turning the soil below. When headlines hit, Oka, Ipperwash, we gathered up the silence we had planted and stuffed our ears with seeds. Each spring, the frost shoulders up new stones we loaded onto wagons and dumped in the swamp. Somewhere thousands of feet under this lake, massive machines claw at walls of salt. No end to what we'll dig up, what we'll try to bury. The land breaks through the map of it. It's all here. Caught between the call and response of sandbar and dune, I want to wait here until the sturgeon return, smelt, run, plovers brood, until I am blasted into beach glass.
Terrific.
Thanks.
I want to make a stitch here, actually, to Jason. I'm going to do something that's maybe a little unfair, but I'm going to quote Jason from an interview that he gave many, many years ago.
Oh, God.
When I always do this. There was an interviewer that asked you what would be evocative of a sense of home, or a fragrance of home, I think was the question. And your response was the sound, or the rocks and the waters of Georgian Bay, the Bruce Peninsula. Do you remember this?
I don't, but I still agree with that.
There we go. It's a good question. It still holds. So that experience of the Bruce Peninsula is an experience of home. And it really struck me when I read that and I read Tom's poem, and I started putting the Bruce Peninsula together between the two of you. Your remark also made me think of Tom's poem, Huron County, which concludes with the line, "Trespassing is coming home." That notion that, a line that reminds us that notions of home in Canada are haunted with colonial histories. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about how you wrestle with these kinds of ghosts in your own ghostwriting. How do you think through those colonial ghosts?
So my next book, which is coming out spring 2023, I have to plug it, most of it takes place on the Bruce Peninsula, which is interesting that you bring it up.
Wow.
I absolutely adore the Bruce Peninsula. It's sort of the oldest, it has some of the oldest rocks on Earth, some of the oldest fossils on Earth, deep time. It's just gorgeous. It feels like another planet when you go up there. So if you want to get away to another planet, which I often do, Brisbane is a good place to go.
Or St. Thomas.
St. Thomas, yeah. St. Thomas, yeah, sure. Yeah, Strath.
Depends on what you want.
But the book is about a guy who is an amateur cryptozoologist. So he goes out in the woods at night searching for things like the great Canadian spider bat and things like that, which is a real, well, I mean, reported to be a real thing that haunts empty Ontario barns. And he was a school teacher. He was a Boy Scout when he grew up. He really, has a scientific relationship with nature, loves tree identification, but he's also a bachelor. And he's sort of just this lonely old guy. At the end of his life, one night when he's out near Plover Mills, Ontario, searching for the great Canadian spider bat, he meets essentially Bigfoot. Like finally, after 50 years of searching through the forests of southwestern Ontario, meets Bigfoot. And this begins basically him sort of just falling apart, sort of like you've been searching for this thing your entire life, and finally you meet it, and it's not what you expect. It's far greater and far more challenging and uncanny, and he takes a trip up to the Bruce Peninsula where he kind of grew up, and falls apart in the most beautiful way. So yeah, I still go back to the Bruce, and what was the question again?
No,
It was just talking about home.
I think you've navigated your way to a wonderful response. I didn't know that was the case too, that you were writing on the Bruce Peninsula. So that's just a really uncanny double. But I think Jenna Rose had something.
Yeah. So this conversation, like this topic, like I said, came out really organically, and were like,
Shoot the shit.
Yeah, shoot the shit, and that's. And I loved it when we would come together, we'd be like, oh, let's talk about this. And, Jason, you and I, we've known each other since like high school, downtown, dirty kids. Now we got Tom, dirty nature. And we've sort of in our own works, like Jason has specifically written about monster. You have a book titled Monster. And then we've talked about how Tom alludes to these monsters in poetry. I'm not a poet at all. We've attempted to school me in some ways on that. And then there's me that's just like talking about like straight up real life shitty monsters. And so something that I always enjoyed about our conversation is while we've complained about these things and like we've identified within our own realms, bookstore, academic, artists, we've sort of talked about what we perceive within the City of London, because I like that we, like the best parts I think were regionally, like our best conversations were talking about London proper. What some of those perceived monsters and like potential solutions, like what does, we've sort of all identified that inaction is just like one of the biggest monsters and crappy things in the city. So what is, like, I guess my question, which I kind of know, I just think you have great perspectives, like let's chat about that. Like what are those modern day monsters here? And what does it look like to change that? Because the nice thing about these stories is usually it comes with some defeat of the monster. Unfortunately, Frankenstein's monster burned to death. I personally cried at that movie as a child. I was like, why would they do that? You just wanted to
Just wanted a friend.
You just wanted a friend and eat a flower. Oh my God, why would you do that? But there is always this idea that like someone prevails and they walk down the street and they're like confident as hell and they're like, I just did that. So what does that look like for the city whose motto really is, let's not say dead, like the river. If the river is like heavily polluted, and no one's saying that, what does that look like?
Yeah. That's a good question, which I'm going to throw back to you, but I'll take a stab at first. Yeah, the river. I was thinking about that. So we still put raw sewage in our river, millions of liters of it, right? Josh mentioned the treaties that correspond to this area. Those treaties, that's breaking of those treaties, right? Because those treaties guarantee the signatories access to the water, and for it to be clear, and a responsibility on the part of the crown to keep it clean. So that's a broken tree right there. So we talk about these treaties, we talk about them in land acknowledgements, which
I hate them.
You hate them? Yeah, we mention these treaties, but we don't talk about in land acknowledgements about how every day is the breaking of them, which I think is.
And putting raw sewage in it, like people would scream if they saw someone dropping a deuce in the river right now. But like we do that on the day to day, every day, but that's fine. But like imagine the pearl clutching of like, I don't know, in my neighborhood, like, someone's taking a poo. Like that, but we do that, that's fine, right? Like.
And it's connected to climate change, right? Because of the storms that we're getting. This will increase that. The city is trying to clean that up, but it's so I guess I'm going to say politics, right? As one avenue to start doing this. I mean, I ran for federally in 2019 because I was just as a dad and a community member and an environmentalist, I just couldn't believe the inaction. I couldn't believe that we were okay to just keep on consuming and living on this land in this way. So I believed in politics. I still do. It's easy to be disillusioned by politics very quickly. But that can also be an excuse not to just put your head down and start doing it, so that when people knock on your door, you have the questions ready for them. Like, what are you doing on the question of the river and the climate action plan in this city? This climate action plan is going to be the next thing this council is really going to have to, and we're going to be voting for a new council, in October, right? And so those are the things my mind starts going to. But like, you should talk about what you do in the city and safe space and what that is, and how that question works with the work that you do.
Oh, yeah. So I'm the director of Safe Space London. So we are a center that supports women, non-binary folks who are sex workers, also at the street level, and folks that are in crisis. During COVID, we not only did not close, but the hours increased, and we served also male-identified folks. There was nowhere to go. We fought with the city to get a porta potty because apparently going to the bathroom is not a dignity that is afforded to folks that have nothing. We do harm reduction supplies. We provide food, clothing, support, resources, anything. And this organization is heavily volunteer-based. These are young folk, mainly, that are coming in with a passion to help. And it is rough. It is tough. And, beyond what I said earlier, there just not being any resources, the inaction of the city is astonishing. Not only when folks find a place that they feel safe to set up camps along the river or in tents, the city, if it's an eyesore, just throws everything to a truck and dumps it. The police are not safe. I don't know about you, but if you've ever had to call 911 lately for the police, good luck. You'll see them in 2 days. Generally, they go to the wrong location. They're not around. And this isn't addressed. Like, people don't have a problem with this until it's a problem that they face personally. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't matter if it happens to your neighbor. It doesn't matter if something is occurring that is violent and dangerous. People don't care, because that's the inaction that we're having. I don't know about you, but we are going to to the polls for the City of London, and the world is on fire. And I'm just going to say, I don't know how I feel about having a full, staunch climate change denier, anti-science counselor on the board. I don't know how anyone feels okay with someone that is, you know, a science denier, a climate change denier on city council. I don't know how anyone is comfortable that during the pandemic and in the recovery period where all the funding for people on the street living rough and they have no money and they have no resources and we are all so stretched, that our mayor is now pokeroo. Where the hell is he? He's probably vacationing somewhere playing golf. You know, but that's the inaction. We're fine with it because for us, we have homes, and we have cars, and we have air conditioning, and we have food. So it doesn't really impact us. It doesn't matter. But we will go downtown and we will complain hard about it. We will complain that our downtown is this, we don't have fancy bike lanes, we don't have this, like, oh my goodness, we don't have this festival coming on, how could we do that, blah, blah, blah. But these are the things that we complain about. That's what gets our britches in a knot. But, so we'll complain about the people on the street. We'll complain that the Thames might stink a bit. But we don't care that there are children in the Thames Valley School District that do not have clean water. And so many people have said to me, well, how do we help? What's the issue? How do kids not have clean water who are going to our schools? It's not a hard solution. It's not even a lot of money. It's that people don't care. Why would the city advocate, the school board, city council, the mayor, Museum London, UWO, why would these places with power advocate for the children in our communities to have safe drinking water? Because they don't care and it doesn't affect them. And this is what I say, this is inaction. And this is the monster that we see in the city. We like to think that we are the 10th largest city in Canada and that we are going to do this. The green bin. How is it Guelph is like celebrating 25 years of having green bins and London just put it off for another 2 years because it is too much. It's not difficult to figure it out. It's not difficult to buy some green bins and get a few other trucks and find a place to go make compost, but we just don't want to. Let's not say we did. You know, it's not difficult to support these places. It's not difficult if we don't allow a developer to just buy up the entire city and do nothing with it. How long have these buildings sat empty? Our downtown is dying because our city council and our mayor doesn't do anything. We just complain about it, but we don't vote people in that will do it. So the monster is inaction, and the solution is action. The solution is saying that this is wrong, that this isn't good, that this is what we want. But people don't like that, because I'm sure there's a couple people in here that are like, ooh, this feels uncomfortable. She's like getting mad at me. Well, lean into it, because that's how you're gonna change, right? That's how we get movement. You know, we saw a devastating thing that happened in the States yesterday. It was devastating, and it's gonna have massive, it's gonna have massive repercussions for so many people and for us. And it is right here. It is here in our city. We are surrounded by blue out of the city. And so the first step of that is when your weird ass uncle or cousin or whatever says something that is racist, that is against people's choice. You say, hey, that's fucked. That's wrong. And you don't just say, oh, that's crazy, Uncle Randy. I'm just gonna sip my drink and walk away. No, you say that's wrong. Because that's action. And that's, yeah, we have to start somewhere. And that's what the city has. That's our big demon, that we want to play with the big boys and the big girls, but we can't. But we're just gonna not and say we did. Like, you know, oh yeah, we're great. We're so progressive. We're so this, we're so that, you know, but we're not. And we're paying a massive price, literally. How much is that Adelaide underpass costing us now? We should have done it years ago when they told us to. Now we're paying like 20 million more. But we don't have money to feed anybody, just so you know. But, you know, it's now. But London's like, people are uncomfortable. And,
That's why October matters.
yeah, October does matter.
It always matters.
And it's Halloween. It's great. Let's all dress up as crappy city politicians and scare the lights out of each other. Like, ah! Look at that perm. Anyways, Jason, to that question, you're a downtown business.
Yeah.
Like, that in itself is its own beast and monster.
And the Center for Arts in the city.
I get, yeah.
You know, like that's the other thing, is that you and
Thank
Vanessa
you.
are building not just a business, but a community.
A hub.
A hub, and I think that's really important and something that I think a lot of people in this room really value, as we do.
Thanks. Thank you. I appreciate that. I do get cheesed off at people when I hear people complain about downtown. To use Jenna's phrase, I just think that's just BS pearl clutching. Downtown is a neighborhood. It's a functioning neighborhood with people living in it. We have people coming around our store bringing their dogs. We have students who are away from home, meeting friends. We have folks who have moved into the condos looking for something to do. Like, I just moved to this town, what the F do I do on Friday afternoon? We're not London's backyard, you know, and I really get cheesed off when London treats downtown like it's their backyard.
Yeah.
And then saying, oh, my backyard's a piece of junk, you know, well, you really haven't taken very good care of it, have you? So yeah, Vanessa and I are there every day, and we love the neighborhood, and I really do believe in the shop. I believe in spaces where people can come. I believe in access to information. I think we've been sold a bill of goods. Only 10% of the world's information is available online. You've been lied to. Information is not free. It is heavily curated. It is heavily politicized. Everything you get for free on the internet is basically worth nothing, as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, it's a joke, and we get books every week that we try to research, antiquarian books, used books. I can't find anything about these books online for free without paying like $3,000 to for like a paywall to find something out. And you pay that money because people do research that stuff for a living. They need to get paid for it. But for just a regular person trying to learn about this weird occult writer or this, old environmental writer from, Canadian history, but I use bookstores where you can get that information for like $5. So I really do believe that. I also believe very strongly, continue what Jenna was saying, in having a place where people of different opinions can come and be confronted about their bullshit, whatever background they might be. I like having a place where my weird conservative uncle can come in and have his, torn a new asshole by Jenna. And I think those places exist. They're disappearing as we're all funneled into little pockets, and that's a mass project too. Those places where people who disagree with one another can just exist and not feel like they've been destroyed by hearing someone else's point of view. Are disappearing as well, and the bookshop functions that way too. More than half of our customers are under the age of 30, which I think is great, because it's mainly a young person's store, and they know what's cool and they know what's smart. So it's important to have places like that in London too, because Cull office is gone, and the Brunswick Hotel is gone, and
so is the Wick.
Places like that are disappearing too. So.
Right, and I'm mindful we have an audience here too, although I do want to note to Embassy Cultural House and the work that they're doing to bring back some of those ideas of the downtown.
I want to nod to them because they were the first to publish the poem that I just read with the Stop Extinction, Restore the Earth exhibit, online exhibit. So look up Embassy Cultural House if you haven't even heard of it. Yeah. You are in for a wonderful day of just Googling around and seeing great stuff.
Absolutely. And we really need coffee too, so if you get this down.
You're all our people.
Yeah, you're our people, and we're your people.
While everybody's thinking of questions, I'm going to Can I impose on Tom to read us another poem while people are thinking of questions to bring to our panelists?
One more.
Yeah, that's
Sure.
good.
Yeah.
And do you need anything?
Yeah, you know what? I would like to read, a poem called Gizzard Shad. Last year, or was it 2 years ago, my pandemic temporality is just messed. But do you remember when the fish all gathered down here? There was a big school of fish. They're called gizzard shad. They're a herring. They're in the Thames at the northernmost extent of their range. But because of, we've had warmer winters, so they're moving more up into this, but then we had a colder snap. So they basically, they shoal in thousands sometimes, but this is also a story about about climate change. So they got caught in a cold winter. They all shoaled down, just down here, in thousands. How many saw them or heard this story? Yeah. So there were these thousands of fish, and because it was COVID and everyone was kind of, had nothing to do, people were rediscovering nature, going for walks, and walk down, and so it became a kind of like almost festival where you walk down and see these fish, and they were kind of monstrous in a way, in that they're kind of like their numbers, and this is what we're going to see more and more, dead seas full of like roiling jellyfish, Phragmites taking over, and we kind of look at these animals that are just doing what they need to do to get by. They're, in fact, the success stories of climate change, and we kind of look at them and call them monstrous when we created the system, we created the world, the circumstances that they are, So this is also nice to read because it dovetails with Embassy Cultural House and Jamili Hassan and Ron Benner, who are here. And Jamili and Ron and I were part of a bigger exhibition called Gardenship and State, which was here. I see Patrick Mann is here, who was one of the curators. So Jamili had this wonderful mosaic that she did based on a photograph that Ron took of these fish. And I don't, that's me fishing
I put that up just for background.
That's just me fishing a typewriter out of the river, which is another poem that I'm not going to read. So show Jamili's mosaic. I hope this is okay that I'm showing this to Jamili. Jamili made this wonderful kind of mosaic of these fish. And you can kind of see the outline of one of the fish in the bottom of it. And it really captures the movement, the irony of using a mosaic to capture this kind of like dynamism movement. And so I wrote a poem about this as well, and we're going to put these together with Ron's photograph and Jamili's piece in the catalog for this Gardenship and State show that we're in. I'm talking too much, so I'm just going to read this poem, Gizzard Shad. And it begins with our rescue. We got a rescue, a COVID rescue pup, which totally not as advertised. Good with children? Yes. No. Good with other dogs? Yes. Totally not good with other dogs. Anyway, we love her. She's the best. We love her. That's right.
She's the best.
She's adorable. Yeah, she's wonderful. Just don't get near her. Gizzard Shad. Our unruly rescue out front, lunging at other dogs, pizza crusts. We follow the river path to the estuary where the fish have shoaled in thousands, their slick coats churning the water in patterned royal, intermittent flashes of silver bellies flip sideways. One wide fishy eye catches mine, tethers two worlds above and below. Three boys smash the water with sticks. A parent in our party, braver than me, says, "Don't do that, please. The fish do not like it." Dead bodies stiff the banks. Our dog holds one in her mouth, sideways, like a smile. Shad gather where warm water is flushed into the river, sewage plants, stormwater drains. Why so many now? No one really knows. We all make jokes about sushi and signs of the apocalypse, laugh loudly through our masks. The crowd grows, more dogs, children. Our son holds a funeral for Carl the fish. "Carl," he says, "you were a fish." I stand hypnotized by those bodies swishing. Pop cans, trash on the creek bed, something flashing red and blue through that undulating screen of fish. Gizzard Chad. Thanks.
Do we have any questions that anyone would want to throw up to our panelists? Yep. Could you project your voice a bit?
One is, where do you think, where do you think the use of monsters how do you think
So the question, if I can just, your question is how can we think about monsters in a kind of positive way?
where do you think that comes from, that idea of
positive or useful or protagonists? Jason Dickson.
Yeah, I was like, I hope Jason takes that one first.
Where does it come from? I'm not sure, honestly. I just find it's very practical. And where it comes from for me, it works. It works wonderfully. So you have, like a neurotic character, or, an uncomfortable situation, and you just drop Bigfoot into it, and then all hell breaks loose. And it's just it's very useful to explore all sorts of things. But where it comes from historically, I'm not sure. I couldn't answer that.
I think different cultures have used monsters in different ways, and so there isn't one kind of like one monster. I think of, again, going back to my dissertation and work on thinking about what a spectacle of a freakish body would look like. The Greeks would put out babies that were born not normal, or how we would say deformed, and think of that as like a monstrous body that was a condemnation by the gods, and a kind of warning that they're pissed off because someone has done something incorrectly, right? So taking this kind of quite by chance thing, it gives coherence to it gives coherence and meaning in a situation that you can't understand. Why would a child be born in this way? And so you give it a narrative of monstrosity, and it makes sense to you, and you can carry on with your world. You can do things. You can do things to protect yourself against it. And so those stories are both can be quite harmful, obviously, as we've talked about today. But I think it's about giving coherence and meaning to a world that we have a hard time understanding.
I would say I have no idea where it comes from historically, but if I was to take a stab in the dark, I'd say that probably comes from denial. Let's make this a positive thing. Let's turn this frown upside down into a lesson. I think we try and, we think we're oysters to some degree, that if we just wrap around this really harmful thing, or this like monster that's standing in front of us or in the mirror, that if we just sort of like deny it and like, no, we can we can poop at a pearl and it's like amazing, but it's like we can't. So I would say this idea of like turning it into useful, or that everyone has these monsters in the closet, or and it's like, it's okay, pal. We all do it, we're all super problematic in a way. I think it comes from like us just trying to make it feel better, not as not as ouchy,
Not as scary.
Yeah, if I'm a dick, but then you're like, everyone's a dick, then I don't have to worry about really doing anything about it. Like, it's just part of the experience, or, you just got to learn that lesson. It's okay. Like maybe, I don't know, buffering it a bit. But I mean, that could also just be me pulling something out of nowhere. So I recognize that. I don't know historically where it's come from. So.
Does that answer your question, more or less?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you.
Yeah, it was a good
Fair
question.
enough.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jen?
I'll throw in another thing that resonates with me. And Jenna Rose mentioned Frankenstein. And when I read that, as most people do, I found it very striking. And as a transgender woman, I found myself looking for sensitivity for the monster. And that connection I discovered afterwards has been drawn at least as far back as 1994, when Susan Stryker wrote a famous paper called My Notes to Victor Frankenstein above the village of Chamonix, performing transgender rape. Fascinating paper for never has one. Read it, but in a larger sense, I suppose you could call the theme feared outcast labeled as monster. And that's something that finds its way to a fair bit of my own writing. So I'll just throw that open to whoever can comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was born in small town Ontario, and I'm blind in one eye. So I have two different colored eyes. I have a black eye and I have a blue eye. And I'm not saying this is the worst life ever lived by any stretch of the imagination, but there was an enormous reaction of my family to that truth. What did we do wrong? How is this extraordinary difficulty going to be overcome? And it was all this hand grenade jumping, like to sort of minimize this. And all these narratives were built. All of this sort of storytelling happened around that simple fact. A lot of it born out of exceptional love, but a lot of it, certainly in the case of people in the village, out of fear of just the weirdo. I can at least have some affinity with that because, just being like a brainy one-eyed kid on a small town playground isn't the most enjoyable experience at that time,
I remember we had in one of our conversations, we had touched a little bit on the work of Diane Arbus. And, at the time, if you were anything beyond the norm, society of the 50s and 60s looked down upon you. And she was asked why she photographed the folks that she did and why she gravitated towards, folks in the LGBTQI plus community, sex workers, drag performers, transgender folks, and folks who were at the time historically seen as being freaks in a freak show at the circus. And she had said that, everyone sort of goes throughout their life looking for that trauma, like they're waiting for it. Like, we're waiting to get found out or about something, or, they're super insecure, they're not doing the right things, they're not doing this, and everyone is sort of doing that. But, folks that have experienced oppression based on who they are, or who they are living authentically, or how they are physically, emotionally, mentally, they're the elite. They're living their lives the way that they know how. They're living their lives authentically, and they are the royalty among us. Folks. The idea was like they've been born with their trauma. It's not trauma necessarily like there's anything wrong with the way that folks are. It's that society is and communities have inflicted trauma upon them. They have created that. And so when you're saying being a kid, brainy one-eyed child.
Small town Ontario.
Yeah, in the small town, that, there's nothing wrong with you. You're so beautiful, baby. But
that was cute. I was a cute kid.
Yeah, but that folks put that on you, and that's you grew into yourself with that. And so, I think that when we're talking about monsters and demons, it's the people that do that to others, that create this idea of what is right, what is wrong in people. And, I think that essentially that trauma is not, those words and those actions of people are not yours to hold, and they're not yours to hold, and what people don't like me, it's not mine to hold. It's not my business what people think of me. But, you know, so.
What is that Arbus quote? A picture is a secret of a secret. The more it tells you, the more it's. Someone remember it? A photograph is a secret of a secret. The more it tells you, the more it hides. You know, something.
She was like the original Inception movie. Deeper and deeper and deeper, and then you don't know what's up and down.
Yeah, there's immense power in monstrosity, right? There's immense power, and I think that's what she was kind of talking about in like, I photograph people who know who they are and whose power is manifest in those photographs. Monsters are always at the pole, create dichotomies of like, it's, you know, otherness, right? There's intense attraction to the other, and then there's repulsion, right? And that's where monsters live, in that space between whether they're scaring us or whether we're completely identifying with them because we're the outsider. That, you know, so I think that's, again, back to your question, and also, Jen, what you were saying about how the duality of really identifying with the monster and the power of the monster to kind of show something.
It was very liberating when the first teenage girl told me I reminded them of David Bowie.
Oh, would be.
You remind me of David Bowie.
Never had that.
I was like, that was a shock.
And then you wore spandex for an entire year.
Yeah.
I have a question from the Zoom, and then we'll come right to. The reason I wanted to throw this one in, because I think there's a little bit of a connection here. I'm going to tweak this to a bit of a dirty nature question. What connection, if any, would you make between the romantic sublime and monsters and demons of place? And I thought of this in light of Frankenstein, that it might be a relevant question now because it is a romantic text as well.
The sublime and monsters.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, the sublime, right, is that notion that you go out into nature and there's the face of God, and it's both kind of awe-inspiring and terrifying at the same time, and you realize how kind of, you know, little you are and insignificant, yet because you have a mind that can grasp that you are, you know, one with nature, and so you are God at the same time. And yeah, that's, like I said, I think a monstrous idea in a lot of ways that has allowed us to kind of, do all kinds of things to nature. I'm not saying that we can't go out into nature and be awe-inspired, right? I don't think anyone's saying that. Like, it is a magical place to be, and you can kind of, but when it becomes this kind of only script that then legitimates, again, like an idea of terra nullius or the doctrine of discovery, right? Those two things go hand in hand, then it becomes incredibly monstrous. And I'm not answering the question.
No,
I got something. In Gladys Pritis, and Glen Piano by Gladys Pritis, it was partly written in response to all these Canadian literary books I was reading, you know, filled with like swooning characters out in the field, and, you know, like clouds roll by, and this ridiculous relationship between, like, you know, this fraught heroine and you know, like stories of the past, and, you know, farmhouse, and just all this garbage. And so it was written partly in response to that, where I have, I'm just gonna look at the camera as if I'm talking to this person, that they're still there. She's this like overwrought heroine who falls in love with this doctor in late 1800s London, Ontario, and she thinks he's this hero, and she writes these poems to him, and the poems are written in the book, and she thinks he's this extraordinary man, and she, you know, she tells it in this beautiful floral language, you know, swooning and you know, like intimacy and closeness, and you get swept up in it, and it's all lovely. But then it turns out that the doctor is this like serial killing monster, and she's totally blind to it. She can't see it, but he's like murdered all sorts of people in town. And that's sort of the danger, I think, of what you're talking about, that particular strain of romanticism. I mean, I love it. Like, it's fun, right? It's fun. It's fun to drink and dance. I love drinking and dancing, but But you could be dancing with the killer and not know it, you know? So
I want to just
it's
push
good
that
to
one,
take a look every once in a while.
one step further. I put this in the slides because I wanted to highlight this because it's a great connection between your work and Tom's as well. Could you tell why you chose this particular plant for the cover of Glenn Cano and Gladys
Well, this is a nice example. Jay Miller at Book Hub, who designed the book, we spent a lot of time tweaking it. We wanted it to look and feel a certain way. We wanted it to be small, so there's unassuming, like you didn't sort of hid the killer inside it, so to speak. And we chose this. That's a water hemlock, and every part of that plant is deadly poison.
That's some dirty nature right there.
Yeah, it'll just kill you, right? And I believe it grows around here too. Like I think you can find it around here. There you go. Yeah, it's in Ron's pond. You can kill yourself right now. There you go. Yeah, so I like this beautiful book, and you know, it's a beautiful thing, but of course it's this nasty little plant.
I thought it was a really wonderful connection. And it was a question here, hold on.
I just want to say from a psychological perspective, the moment outside, the monsters in fact us. It's a part of us that we did not. We should also think that. But if you go back to Freud or Jung, the monster is a part of us that we deny, but in the literary arts, we put it on the outside. We make it Frankenstein, we make it this scary horror, but the monster is really the part of us that we deny, and we have to be the big one.
Yeah.
So, you know, like Frankenstein is like a perfect metaphor, right? Because like he was created, and then they, you know, and the only people in that whole story that saw him who he was the child and the blind man, and then because of the way he looked, and he couldn't speak like everybody else, and they created him, and then they made him the monster, but everybody was.
And it's also a tale of pursuit, right? The monster's sent out into the world, and then and Dr. Frankenstein pursues him, but then the monster turns it around and pursues him back.
Right.
So it's the return of the repressed, it's that the monster then comes back to you.
I think on like touching on that, I think my work doesn't attempt to be subtle. I don't really know subtlety very, very well. I also just think it's, in certain regard, it's a waste of time to be subtle. There are some things that we should not be subtle about, and there are some things we should not be quiet about. And, you know, sometimes it's important to just talk about the elephant in the room, because dancing around it, it's just a waste of time, you know? And so for me, in my work, it's like, let's just talk about this monster straight up. This is what it looks like, this is what it smells like, this is what it's all little tiny gross baby monsters that are running around the city and doing all of these things, and these are the ways that it's pretty gross. And so I think, especially now, you know, within my own writing, within my own work, and within my own living in my day-to-day, there is no time to dance around monsters, you know?
And I think for your work, there is no separation between what you do day to day, your activism, your art, you know, your activism and art are together.
Yeah,
and that's one of the answers I think that you asked before, is like, you know, how do you start, if inaction is the problem, you know, then activism, and maybe thinking about a broader understanding of what art can do in relationship to activism, even though that's not it's not a brand new idea by any means, I'm not saying that, but I think that that's something that we all talked about a lot, was that how our day-to-day lives and the work that we do in the community is fully coextensive with the things that we write, the things that we think about, and the way that we try to make art and make community as also a community of artists and activists. Many of you are here today and have many more interesting things to say about all these things too.
I think just I did have a question one time on a panel where someone asked me if I wasn't writing about Indigenous issues, what would I write about? And I was like, I have no idea, because I'm not afforded that ability. I don't have the privilege in my life to take off the brown of my skin, not that I ever would, but, you know, I don't have the privilege of having time to make up fake monsters. You know, I don't have that. It's right here. One day when I feel like I've said enough and the world has moved forward enough in these things, maybe I'll just be the most boring ass writer and I'll just do like kids stories about like cats and stuff. just like write about cats and rainbows and things that are just real feel good, but I have no idea what that looks like, because like we're not there, and I don't foresee myself being there anytime soon, but thus is life.
Yeah, we're getting close to, we're at 3:30, which is about the time that we'd set for this event, which is actually, your words, both of your words are just a remarkable place to kind of draw. But I also just want to allow you all, if you wanted to, for any kind of final thoughts about this conversation that you've been having and all the excellent questions and engagements that we've had about this particular question.
Well, for people who support mental health services in Ontario.
Yep.
Great. I want to draw everybody's attention, if you're a poet, there's an event next week on Wednesday. This is the Antler River Poetry Open Mic. It's taking place at the TAP Center for Creativity down the road. So if you are a poet and you'd like to read your poetry, there is an opportunity to do so with a community of poets, and there'll be some readings from the award winners for Antler River's poetry contest this year, as well as the student writer in residence, Matthew Dawkins. I would like to thank everybody here who joined us. I would like to thank you for your engagement. I can see everybody just kind of following the thoughts and the comments from our panelists. I'm so grateful to all three of you, Jenna Rose, Tom, and Jason, for being with us and being so candid and so intimate and so personal with your thoughts about your work and about how these questions impact you. Thanks to everybody at home who is joining us on the Zoom. I really thank them. We're so glad to be back in person, and thank you so much, Museum London, for letting us be in your space. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Can you unhook me?
Yeah.